Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome yet again to another episode of Dinner Guide. On this particular episode, I'm going to be doing some very wonderful things with some mutton. I'm also going to show you a very simple take on Lyonnaise potatoes, and we're also going to be serving that with a simple salad. But before we do, we're going to introduce the ingredients before us today. So from the very front, I've got 1 stock cube, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 tablespoon of 1,000 Islands dressing. I've also got some dried rosemary, 1 teaspoon of paprika powder, and some Worcestershire sauce. You're also going to require half a red onion, a small handful of some fresh parsley, about 2 pieces of carrot and 1 medium-sized tomato, about 3 pieces of chops, about 250 grams in total, some lettuce to serve your salad in, some potatoes to make your Lyonnaise, some oil to cook with, and last but not least, some peppercorns to crush. So we're going to take a break now, allowing you to grab your pens and papers if you're taking notes, and we'll catch you after a very short break. Welcome back, viewers. If you're just catching up, we've just introduced the ingredients for today. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be working with some mutton. I'm also going to be showing you a very simple take on Lyonnaise potatoes, which you're about to begin with first. So very simply, drain the water from your potatoes. Now you should be able to have about 2 to 3 medium-sized potatoes already peeled, washed, and ready for the chopping. And all you're going to do at this stage is proceed to slice some very thin slices from your potatoes. And you can proceed to reserve those end pieces. Proceed to do the same thing with your second piece. That should actually be just about enough. So very simply, into some oil that's already on the heat, we're going to proceed to drop in our potatoes and allow them to cook until very golden in color, almost crispy and fully cooked. And for those, I'm actually going to be starting them off at very low heat. So your temperature of your oil should actually be anywhere just about under 150 degrees. Remember, that is an optimum temperature if you're going to be blanching your potatoes, so it also allows your potatoes to cook off very slowly. But before we proceed, I'm just going to move that out of the way and allow that to cook undisturbed on the side. And while that continues, proceed to grab your mutton. And now at this stage, we're simply going to begin by seasoning our pieces of mutton. So just going to move those beautiful chunks onto a separate board on the side. And we're going to proceed to season with some salt. Proceed to turn over. Proceed to season once more. And for those of you who may be wondering what particular cut of mutton I'm using today, I'm going to be using chops. Proceed to season with some black peppercorns and proceed to turn over. Season with some black peppercorns on the opposite side as well. And now these are very much ready to go into your hot pan. So to begin the process, drizzle some oil onto your pan and allow it to come to the heat. Now for the mutton, as I mentioned, particularly good cuts of mutton that you can get out there. There are very many. There's basically a whole carcass to work with, but as I mentioned, different cuts also alternate for different processes of cooking and techniques. So for this particular beautiful chunks of mutton, remember these are still on the bone. If you can be able to see the sections with the bone there, these are particularly very, very tasty, especially just pan fried straight onto a hot pan and served as they are. You can alternatively also opt to use an alternative sauce of your choice. So it could be rosemary, it could be any particular sauce of your choice. But as I said, you are not limited to the ingredients we have on the table today. You can also incorporate your very own tastes as you go along. So pan is nice and hot. Proceed to move your pan around, allowing your oil to coat most or all of the surface. And we'll begin by adding those to the pan. So just lift those very, very lightly, making sure, of course, to always try and grab that bit of seasoning still on your board. Proceed to move those onto your pan and follow up with the rest of your pieces. Now we're going to allow for the first process of cooking. So this will basically take anywhere between 6 to 8 minutes to color on the first side, and then we'll proceed to turn those over. But in the meantime, I will direct your attention to the potatoes. As you can be able to see from the cameras, they're now almost floating all the way to the top of the surface of the oil. So that's a particular good sign that those are actually almost cooked. So very importantly, grab a separate plate that you're going to be setting those on. And you can proceed to line that with some parchment paper. Remember, this is very handy, especially when trying to reduce the amount of oil in your food. And now your chops are now just beautifully beginning to color on the first side. We're going to proceed to turn this over. And it's a nice, beautiful mutton kind of aroma coming through the studios at the moment. Remember, as I said, mutton is a particularly very distinct, it actually has a very distinct smell to it. So you can actually be able to tell if your mutton is actually the right cut. Remember, you will actually begin to get that beautiful, farmy, like grassland kind of aroma. And that's a particularly good sign to check for your mutton. Another thing to also mention, also be sure to make sure that you get some beautiful cuts of mutton that are not too lean. Remember, meat that is particularly very, very lean will not particularly grill or cook on the pan very, very simply, especially if it's got a bone to it. So very important that you make sure, if you're going to get your chops sliced as well, make sure that they're not over an inch in thickness, because it will also hinder them from cooking evenly. Right, so we're just going to turn those over once more. And at this stage, I'll proceed to reduce my temperature completely and allow those to continue just cooking at very, very low heat. While that does so, I'll proceed to also just toss my potatoes in the oil. They've actually now started to puff right through. So those should be about 4 or 5 minutes away from being fully cooked, of course. Now, while we await for this to continue, we're going to start also just to chop up some onion, which we'll be using to make our Lyonnaise potatoes. So I'm using half a red onion for this recipe. Proceed to slice that into very, very thin slices. course, always making sure to not incorporate the stock. Now, just to come back to the mutton, I'm also going to turn that over once more, using the aid of your tongue to push down the fat on the side, making sure that your bone is fully exposed on both sides. And now while that continues, we're also going to just grab a separate plate or a board of choice. Remember, we are going to take the mutton out very, very briefly, allowing it to really rest. And this process is particularly important because it does aid in allowing you to not really cook your meat fully, allows it to rest as well, really allows it to get that tender in them, also allows for the flavors to really penetrate. Right, so once those have been cooking for about 8 to 10 minutes, we're just going to move them onto our board and allow them to rest for anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes before we finish those off. And you can proceed to remove your pan. And onto a second pan. We're going to proceed to reheat the pan very, very quickly. Remember, this is basically just to finish off our Lyonnaise potatoes. So from this end, we're going to turn that off completely. And we will proceed to remove this from the heat. As you can be able to see there, nice, beautiful golden color coming through. Just finish taking those out, allowing them to drain very, very briefly. Of course, always making sure to pay special attention to allow your potatoes to drain before getting them out of your pot completely. Right, once those are out, proceed to allow those to just sit on the side of your counter, allowing them to drain very, very quickly. And in the meantime, in a pan that's already hot, we're going to begin to finish off our potatoes. So very, very simply, begin by adding your onions first. We're also going to be incorporating some fresh parsley. So I'm just going to grab a few stalks and just firmly by pressing them onto your board, begin to chop very, very finely. Making sure to not incorporate any of the stalks. Right now, your onions are now beautifully sweating away. Proceed to turn those on your pan. Season with some black peppercorns and a small pinch of salt. And just proceed to toss those. And as soon as your onions are nicely, beautifully, almost translucent, proceed to add your parsley. And proceed to also add your potatoes. Now all you need to do at this stage is at high heat, proceed to fry those together and toss continuously on your pan. And you should actually proceed to stop right almost at the point where your oil is completely absorbed by the potatoes and the onions, and your pan is almost actually also dry as well. And that is a very, very simple take on Lyonnaise potatoes. We are going to take a short break, and when we do come back, I will show you how to finish off this very simple salad, and I'll take you through the last process of finishing off your grilled mutton. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. For those of you who are just catching up with us, we've just been finishing off our Lyonnaise potatoes. Our mutton is already cooked the first stage, but now we're going to go into the last and final process. So I already have a pan on the go. To that we'll proceed to add our Worcestershire sauce. Add also your stock cube, a small pinch of paprika powder just to give it a bit of heat, and of course your dried rosemary, which will just basically give your mutton it'll just give you a nice beautiful general flavor. Now using a spoon, proceed to break your stock cube, and as soon as it's fully dissolved, we're going to proceed to add our mutton. Of course, I'm doing this at very low heat. This should allow for your mutton to really just absorb the flavors without necessarily cooking any further. And also I'm just going to add the juices from the mutton. Remember, those actually carry quite a bit of some beautiful flavor. And all you can do now is proceed to toss those in the sauce very quickly. And as I mentioned, doing this at low heat will allow for you to avoid your sauce from reducing too quickly. Also allows for a nice even coating, and also gives your meat just a bit of enough time to really absorb the juices and cook through to the very end. While that continues, we'll proceed to begin by moving our Lyonnaise potatoes onto a plate. So I'm just going to lay those right on the center of my plate of choice. Of course, scooping over any of the onions still left over in your pan. And place those right over the top. Now we're also going to toss our meat once more. Now the sauce isn't fully dissolved and absorbed at this stage, so we're just going to allow that an extra minute. And while we do so, we're going to quickly assemble a very simple salad. So I'll begin by slicing some diagonal buttons from one whole carrot. You can reserve the end tips. Proceed to add that to a bowl. Also add in your Thousand Islands dressing. Add in your lettuce. And very simply proceed to toss everything together in your bowl. Of course, making sure to coat your lettuce with the dressing. And you can also proceed to slice in your tomato wedges. So proceed to slice lengthways and into 4 quarters. Toss that very briefly. You can also season with a small pinch of salt, some freshly ground peppercorns. Now you can proceed to move your mixture to your plate, beginning with your tomatoes. Of course, spreading them always allows for you to get a nice general height when plating. Proceed to add over your lettuce. And just finish very simply by garnishing with some pieces of carrot. So very simple salad, something you can all get creative with. Remember, you're not limited to the ingredients we used. This is just a simple salad, something to really just freshen up the plate. And now our mutton is done, liquid is absorbed, and your chunks are looking nice and juicy. Now a nice beautiful feel of rosemary coming through there, so that's a particularly strong flavor, and it's also a very good addition to any of your pork, lamb, or even mutton dishes. Always gives it a nice beautiful gamey finish. And now, just to finish this off, proceed to add your mutton to your plate. Of course, plating those towards the front, always giving, of course, for the best side. And just very simply, with the aid of your spoon, proceed to just scoop any sauce remaining in the bottom of your pan and proceed to drizzle that over your mutton chunks. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my very simple take on grilled mutton with rosemary, with some Lyonnaise potatoes and a very simple side salad. I hope you've managed to have a bit of fun today, and you've managed to pick up something fresh and new for your very own recipes at home. But for now, and until the next episode, where we continue to improvise and bring some new techniques to your own cooking techniques at home, I will bid you farewell, wishing you a lovely evening, a lovely dinner, and see you soon.